Welcome to the second half of Sangha Morning, and welcome if you've joined us on YouTube. So this morning I'm going to talk to you about the three Laksanas, or the three marks of conditioned existence. And I'm going to begin with my favorite quote from the whole of the Pali Canon. All conditioned things are impermanent. When we see this with wisdom, we grow weary of our suffering. This is the path to purity. All conditioned things are unsatisfactory. When we see this with wisdom, we grow weary of our suffering. This is the path to purity. All things are not self. When we see this with wisdom, we grow weary of our suffering. This is the path to purity. And every time I hear those verses from the Dhammapada, I do experience a little shiver of perhaps excitement or disturbance, quite hard to know what. Just perhaps something to do with the deep significance of those verses, at least to me, but I think to all of us. So only last week, I gave a talk on this topic in the context of the Newcomers' Night. And over the years, I've given the talk on the three Laksanas endless times, and always I feel frustrated at the end. Because maybe I just feel the responsibility of conveying the deep significance of the teaching, at the same time aware of, the real risk that at the end, people at the class, go away miserable and think that Buddhism is too pessimistic for them, and what happened to the joy that Buddhism seemed to promise. No doubt it's just my lack of skill in presenting that material. But yes, it is. I feel frustrated because I need to present a positive side of the three Laksanas, and at the same time try and get to their depths. And often all I manage is to be a bit superficial, actually. So let's see if I can do better today. So for some of you, the basic teaching of the three Laksanas is very familiar. So we're talking about the three marks or the three characteristics of conditioned existence. In other words, our life in the world. But perhaps it's not too familiar to some of you. So, I will take a little time to explain the basic teaching, and then perhaps get to the interesting bits as well. So this is what the Buddha said about the three Laksanas. He said, the five aggregates are anicca, impermanent. Whatever is impermanent, that is dukkha, unsatisfactory. Whatever is dukkha, that is without atta, without self. So the five aggregates that the Buddha is talking about are what Buddhism posits as the elements that make up our psychophysical organism. The five aggregates, or the five skandhas, or the five khandhas, they are form, feeling, perception, volition, and consciousness. So what the Buddha is saying is that all things are subject to change. They are unsatisfactory because nothing stays the same, and they are insubstantial because of impermanence. and for that can't have an unchangeable core at their heart. So now perhaps you too are thinking, well, that's all a bit obvious. Yeah. So what's the great fuss about this teaching? And perhaps having heard what I have said so far, you may actually agree that the world we live in, our lives, our bodies, our minds, are like this. They are impermanent, unsatisfactory, and insubstantial, or you may not agree. So we'll see. So I'll just say a little more about each mark, each characteristic, each lakshana, to make sure that we're all clear about them, starting with impermanence. So everything in the known universe is impermanent. Of course, some things stay for various lengths of time. Some subatomic particles last only for a very brief moment. And Buddhism as well suggests that our experience is made up of these mind moments that last for a blink of an eye. And on the other hand, there are mountains that last a relatively long time, not to mention galaxies. Yet we know from whatever we know from science that they too, those long-term objects, come into being and go out of being. So the Buddha said, impermanent are all component things. They arise and cease. That is their nature. They come into being and pass away. Release from them is bliss supreme. And we may not yet recognize that the release from the world is supreme bliss for us. But we can recognize the positive aspect of impermanence, the fact that because of impermanence, something new can come into being. So we may have lost something, but something new and possibly even better can come into our life. When I was 17, my father became ill and died in 3 months. My dad was my hero, and I was utterly heartbroken. So what new, better thing could possibly have come into my life? Of course, mostly we see that new, better thing retrospectively. But what new, better thing came into my life? That first of all, I grew closer to my mom. And I moved from childhood to adulthood there and then. And I gained my freedom. And that sounds a funny thing to say when I just had a devastating loss. I was in the middle of great grief. But it felt somewhere like I had gained my freedom. Perhaps because I now only had one parent to deal with, but much more likely that my relationship with my dad had kept me stuck in childhood. And now I was free to fly. So what about unsatisfactoriness? It's obvious that our life is not unsatisfactory all the time. Some of us experience long periods of happiness. But fundamentally, we all know that sooner or later we will fall ill, we'll become old, perhaps we'll experience real physical pain, what the scriptures call dukkha. And we know that it's painful to lose what we love, and also painful to live with what we don't love. And then many of us live with what we might call existential pain, asking ourselves questions about, what's the point of it all? What's the point of human life? Probably all of us, or some of us anyway, have asked those questions since we were children. It is said that enlightenment is only possible because we experience, like the oyster, the grit and the pain of suffering. Without that pain, without that suffering, we would be like the long-lived gods, just enjoying ourselves, forgetting all about our spiritual self, that side of us that makes us truly human. And so finally, insubstantiality. So certainly some things appear more substantial than other things. Some things appear as if there really was something fixed at their core. And we may have a strong sense of self that seems to have existed since we can remember. And that self may not appear to have changed fundamentally in our lifetime. But I assume that we are all here because we want to change. And we believe that we can change. Personal transformation being only possible because the self is not fixed, not substantial. So on the whole then, we can perhaps agree that the three marks indeed describe what conditioned existence is like. But the Buddha saw 2,500 years ago, and we see sometimes in ourselves, and even more clearly in others, that we tend to live our lives as if the three marks don't apply. Perhaps particularly don't apply to us. It's as if our vision has become clouded, as if we're looking at the world through a distorted lens. And through that distorted lens, what is impermanent appears permanent, what is unsatisfactory appears satisfactory, what is insubstantial appears substantial. So what is this distorted lens? Well, it's made of greed and aversion, of likes and dislikes, mistaken ideas. We are said to suffer from three kinds of perversion. The word is vipalasa or viparyasa in Sanskrit. And these perversions are perverted perception, perverted thought, and perverted view. And we can probably see how the three perversions follow one from another. So perverted thought following from perverted perception, and perverted view following from perverted thought. And through these three kinds of perversions, we are unable to see how things really are. We are unable to see reality. So seeing things as they really are means being able to see them in the light of the three Laksanas, without the perversions. Reality is never static. It's not a state. It's more like a perpetual event. So a noun-like reality can't really do justice to that dynamic nature of reality. Insight, then, that vital wisdom of Buddhism, consists in applying our unperverted experience of the three marks to our life and being able to reflect in our meditation practice on those three characteristics manifesting in our life. So this is really important. This is the most important thing that I'm going to say this morning. Insight consists of applying our experience of the three marks to our life and meditating on that experience. So many years ago, when I was a relatively new order member, and clearly an overconfident one as well, I gave a talk on shunyata, on emptiness. And I know I can see order members raising an eyebrow. I fancy Fancy trying to talk about something that's beyond concepts. Anyway, I did it. And the only useful bit of that talk was what I called the emptiness first aid kit. It was my attempt to give an idea of how we might approach that ineffable topic from our understanding of other less nebulous teachings. So today I want to put that first aid kit to another use, to emphasize the central place of the three Lakshanas in the Buddha's teaching, to help us see how fundamentally important this teaching is, if we haven't already seen it. So we have impermanence, we have unsatisfactoriness, and we have insubstantiality, and impermanence as the basis for those two others, as I have described. So now I'm going to draw on my first aid kit. Just to say, I haven't made this up. I got this from Sangharajita. So this is my little equation of impermanence equaling paticca samuppada equaling emptiness. So I'm saying that impermanence is the same teaching as paticca samuppada, conditionality, and the same teaching as emptiness, albeit that each teaching looks at reality from a slightly different point of view. Conditioned reality I'm talking about here. So in our conditioned world, paticca samuppada, or conditionality, is also a description for unsatisfactoriness. They're the same thing. And emptiness is a description of insubstantiality. The two are the same thing. So now I need to say this really slowly, as I haven't got another equation. Impermanence is both the same thing as paticca samuppada, and hence unsatisfactoriness, and the same thing as emptiness, hence insubstantiality, and it's also the basis for them. So my point in bringing this in is that if you ever struggle with understanding either paticca samuppada, conditionality, or emptiness, and most of us do, I suspect, we can just reflect on impermanence, and that'll be enough. It will also keep us safe from deluded ideas about emptiness. So just to conclude, my main point here is that there is this great and wonderful teaching in Buddhism, and that is the three Lakshanas, and especially impermanence. Now, a teacher, Sangharajita, says that the whole teaching of Buddhism can be described with that one word, impermanence. So I hope that I've demonstrated the reasons why this teaching of the three Lakshanas is so central and so important, and perhaps given a good reason for making a bit of a fuss of it.